Officer Marcus Hayes had been with the Kennesaw Police Department for 7 years. When he walked into a situation that would destroy his career and cost the city $3.8 million. He was 33 years old, experienced enough to know better, but apparently convinced that his authority was absolute, and his instincts were flawless. One Saturday afternoon in a Walmart parking lot in suburban Atlanta, he responded to a vague call about suspicious activity near the shopping carts and confronted a black woman loading groceries into a Honda Accord. The woman was Captain Diane Richardson, his new commanding officer, appointed just 3 weeks earlier to clean up a precinct struggling with community trust issues. What Hayes did next, demanding identification without cause, dismissing her verbal identification, and detaining her while shoppers watched, would become proof of how assumptions destroy careers, reputations, and the fragile trust between police and the communities they serve. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. A black woman in her late 40s, Captain Diane Richardson, was standing in the parking lot of Walmart on Barrett Parkway, placing bags of groceries into the trunk of her car on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Her car keys were in her hand. Her receipt was visible in the front seat. No crime, no violation, no disturbance. Just a police captain buying groceries on her day off. But Officer Hayes saw her through a filter, so distorted by assumptions about who commits crimes in parking lots, that he couldn't process a black woman as a legitimate customer, let alone his commanding officer. The Walmart on Barrett Parkway sits at the edge of Kennesaw, Georgia, a suburb northwest of Atlanta. It's the kind of place that serves a diverse community. Families loading up on weekly groceries, retirees picking up prescriptions, teenagers grabbing snacks, contractors buying supplies. The parking lot is massive, stretching across several acres, divided into sections by cart corrals and light poles. On any given weekend, it's busy but manageable. It was 3:45 p.m. on a Saturday in late September. The Georgia heat was starting to ease, the temperature hovering around 82 degrees. The parking lot was half full, cars scattered across the asphalt, clusters of shoppers pushing carts toward their vehicles. Inside the store, weekend crowds moved through wide aisles stocked with everything from groceries to electronics. Outside, the ambient noise was typical: car doors closing, engines starting, shopping carts rattling across pavement, the occasional child's voice echoing across the lot. The Barrett Parkway Walmart sits in a commercial corridor lined with chain restaurants, big box stores, and strip malls. It's a middle-class area, predominantly white but increasingly diverse as Atlanta's suburbs expand. The kind of neighborhood where people feel safe shopping alone, where police presence is routine but rarely aggressive, where incidents are unusual enough to attract attention when they happen. This was one of those incidents. The parking lot had security cameras at every entrance and along the light poles. Shoppers came and went, oblivious to what was about to unfold near aisle 7, row C, where a black woman was about to be confronted by an officer who didn't recognize authority when it came in a form he didn't expect. Captain Diane Richardson had been with the Kennesaw Police Department for 24 years. 24 years of service that had taken her from patrol officer to detective to sergeant to lieutenant, and finally, 3 weeks ago, to captain. She commanded the 3rd Precinct, the largest of Kennesaw's 3 patrol districts, responsible for 47 officers and 68 square miles of suburban territory. Her promotion had been earned through decades of exemplary service, solving cases that others gave up on, mentoring young officers who went on to leadership roles themselves, de-escalating community tensions when protests threatened to turn violent, and implementing training programs that reduced use of force incidents by 31% over 4 years. Captain Richardson had graduated from Georgia State University with a degree in criminal justice, then completed her master's degree in public administration from Kennesaw State while working full-time as a patrol officer. She'd attended the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, a prestigious 10-week program for law enforcement leaders. She'd clerked for the chief of police for 2 years, learning the administrative and political side of policing. She'd received the Governor's Public Safety Award, the Police Officer of the Year designation twice, and commendations from the NAACP for her work bridging divides between law enforcement and black communities. At 48 years old, Captain Richardson was at the peak of her career. She was a single mother of 2 grown sons, both in college. She'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, and family time to build her career. She'd worked nights, weekends, holidays, whatever it took to prove herself in a profession where black women rarely reached command positions. Her colleagues respected her. Her officers, the ones who knew her, trusted her. The community advocates who'd fought the department for years considered her a sign of real change. That Saturday, Captain Richardson had taken a rare day off. No meetings, no crises, no administrative paperwork, just errands. She'd gone to Walmart around 3:15 p.m., parking her personal vehicle, a silver 2019 Honda Accord, in the middle of the lot. She'd worn jeans, a navy blue polo shirt, and sneakers. Casual, comfortable. Nothing that identified her as law enforcement. She didn't carry her badge off duty unless she expected to need it. She didn't carry her service weapon. It was locked in her home safe. She looked like what she was, a middle-aged woman running weekend errands. She'd spent 25 minutes inside Walmart, buying groceries, fresh vegetables, chicken, pasta, cleaning supplies, toiletries. She'd checked out at the self-service register, paid with her debit card, collected her receipt, and pushed her cart toward the exit. She'd loaded 4 bags into her trunk, methodical and efficient, when she became aware of a patrol car pulling up behind her vehicle, blocking her in. But to Officer Marcus Hayes, Captain Diane Richardson's presence in that parking lot was a problem, and he had decided to do something about it. Officer Marcus Hayes was 33 years old. He'd been a patrol officer with the Kennesaw Police Department for 7 years, hired straight out of the police academy with ambitions to make detective someday. He was aggressive, confident, and convinced that his instincts about criminal activity were rarely wrong. His supervisors described him as proactive but occasionally overzealous, terms that translated to, he made a lot of stops, wrote a lot of tickets, and generated a lot of complaints. In 7 years, Officer Hayes had compiled a record that should have raised immediate concerns. 9 complaints. 9? 6 of them involved allegations of racial profiling or excessive use of authority against black residents. 2 had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory bias training. The other 7 had been closed with insufficient evidence, despite witness statements and pattern documentation. Hayes had a pattern. He stopped black drivers in predominantly white neighborhoods, demanding explanations for their presence. He questioned black shoppers in stores, asking for receipts before they'd even left the building. He detained black teenagers in public spaces, citing vague suspicions that never materialized into actual charges. A black man walking his dog near a gated community. Hayes stopped him, demanded ID, and asked what he was doing in the neighborhood. The man lived there, a black woman jogging through a park at dawn. Hayes followed her in his patrol car for 6 blocks, then stopped her to ask if she'd stolen the expensive running shoes she was wearing. She was a physician training for a marathon. A black teenager sitting in a parked car outside a convenience store. Hayes approached with his hand on his weapon, ordered the kid out of the car, and searched the vehicle without consent. The teenager was waiting for his mother, who was inside buying lottery tickets. The pattern was clear. The documentation was extensive, but Hayes remained on patrol. His supervisors noted in evaluations that he needed to improve community relations and exercise better judgment in initiating contact. But those notes never translated into meaningful consequences. When the complaints reached a certain threshold, Hayes was sent to a 4-hour training session on implicit bias. He attended, signed the completion form, and went right back to work. That Saturday afternoon, Hayes was on patrol when he received a call. It wasn't a 911 emergency. It wasn't a specific complaint. It was a general radio dispatch. Suspicious activity reported near Walmart, Barrett Parkway, possible theft, shopping carts left in parking lot, vague description of individuals loitering, the kind of call that could mean anything or nothing, the kind that required officer discretion. Hayes responded immediately. He drove to the Walmart parking lot, scanning for anything that looked suspicious. His mind filled in a narrative before he even arrived. Shoplifters, probably juveniles, maybe a car break-in. He cruised the rows slowly, looking for someone who seemed out of place. His eyes landed on a black woman standing at the trunk of a Honda Accord, loading grocery bags. She was alone. She was taking her time. In Hayes's mind, that combination flagged as suspicious. Why was she alone? Why was she moving slowly? Was she stealing? Was the car even hers? He pulled his patrol car directly behind her vehicle, blocking her in. He put the car in park, checked his body camera to make sure it was recording, and stepped out. Do you think officers should face automatic termination after 5 sustained complaints of racial profiling? Drop your answer below. Captain Richardson was placing the last grocery bag into her trunk when she heard the patrol car pull up behind her. She glanced back, saw the Kennesaw PD markings, and assumed the officer was responding to something nearby. She turned back to her groceries, closing the trunk. Then she heard his voice. "Step away from the vehicle." Richardson turned, confused. The officer was standing 10 feet away, hands on his belt, staring at her with an expression she recognized immediately. Suspicion. "Excuse me?" I said. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Richardson's confusion shifted to disbelief. She was standing in a Walmart parking lot, loading groceries, in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses. "Officer, I'm loading groceries into my car. This is my vehicle." Hayes stepped closer, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Ma'am, we've had reports of suspicious activity in this parking lot. I need to see identification." Richardson felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the awareness that this situation could escalate quickly if she didn't handle it carefully. She was a captain in the police department, but she was also a black woman being confronted by a white officer who clearly didn't recognize her. Suspicious activity? "I just walked out of Walmart with groceries. Here's my receipt." She gestured to the front seat of her car, where the receipt was visible through the windshield. Hayes glanced at it, then back at her. "That doesn't tell me who you are. License and registration. Now." Richardson's voice remained calm, but the edge was unmistakable. "Officer, I'm Captain Diane Richardson. I command the 3rd Precinct. Your precinct. I was appointed 3 weeks ago. We've met at roll call." Hayes stared at her, processing the claim. His expression didn't soften. It hardened. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor. License. Now." This is where assumptions become impenetrable. Officer Hayes had responded to a vague call about suspicious activity. When he arrived, he saw a black woman in a parking lot. In his mind, that confirmed the suspicion. Every piece of information after that, her calm explanation, her reference to groceries, her identification as his commanding officer, was filtered through his initial assumption. He wasn't looking at Captain Richardson. He was looking at someone trying to avoid accountability. The parking lot around them had quieted. Shoppers loading their own cars had stopped to watch. A woman with 2 children paused near a shopping cart, her phone out, recording. A man leaning against his truck called out, "Hey, she's just putting groceries away. Leave her alone." Hayes ignored him. "Ma'am, I'm not going to." Ask again. Identification. Richardson reached slowly into her purse, pulling out her wallet. She removed her driver's license and held it up. "Here, my license. And if you check your department roster, you'll see my name listed as commanding officer of the 3rd Precinct." Hayes took the license, glanced at it, then looked back at her. "How do I know this is yours?" "Because it has my name and my photo on it." Could be fake. Richardson's patience was eroding. She was a captain in the police department, standing in a parking lot, being accused of using a fake ID by one of her own officers. "Officer, what is your badge number?" Hayes stiffened. "Why?" "Because when I file a complaint about this stop, I want to make sure I have the correct information." Hayes's jaw tightened. "You're not filing anything. You're going to step over to my vehicle while I verify this ID. Verify it? Call dispatch. Call the precinct. Call anyone. They'll confirm who I am." Hayes pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 237. I need an ID verification. Driver's license for Diane Richardson, DOB." He read the information from her license into the radio. Richardson stood next to her car, arms crossed, watching shoppers record the scene on their phones. This was going to be everywhere within hours. The response came back within 2 minutes. Unit 237? That's Captain Diane Richardson, 3rd Precinct Commander. Is there a problem? Hayes's face went pale. He stared at the radio, then at Richardson, then back at the radio. No problem. Just verifying. He clipped the radio back to his belt, still holding her driver's license. Should officers be required to recognize their own command staff before initiating stops? Let me know what you think. Richardson stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. My license. Now. Hayes handed it back, his hand shaking slightly. Ma'am, I was responding to a call about suspicious activity, and you decided that a woman loading groceries into her car in the middle of the afternoon was suspicious enough to detain. I didn't know who you were. You didn't ask. You assumed. And when I told you I was your captain, you called me a liar. Hayes opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Before he could recover, another patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Lieutenant James Chen, a 19-year veteran and Richardson's second-in-command at the 3rd Precinct, stepped out of the vehicle. He'd heard the radio traffic and recognized Richardson's name. He'd driven over immediately, already knowing this was going to be bad. Chen approached, his expression a mix of concern and barely contained anger. Captain Richardson, are you all right? Richardson nodded. I'm fine, Lieutenant. Officer Hayes here was responding to a call about suspicious activity. Apparently, a black woman buying groceries qualified. Chen turned to Hayes, his voice dropping to something cold and deliberate. Officer Hayes, what exactly happened here? Hayes stammered through an explanation. The call, the stop, the request for ID, the verification. With every sentence, he seemed to realize how indefensible it sounded. Chen listened, his expression darkening. You stopped your commanding officer in a parking lot because you thought she looked suspicious. I didn't recognize her. So your response to not recognizing someone loading groceries into their car is to detain them and demand ID? Hayes said nothing. Chen turned to Richardson. Captain, with your permission, I'd like to handle this. Richardson nodded. Please do. Chen stepped closer to Hayes, his voice low enough that only Hayes could hear, but the words were sharp and final. Badge and radio. You're suspended effective immediately. Administrative leave pending investigation. Hayes's face went white. Lieutenant, you were just racially profiling your commanding officer. Badge. Now. Hayes unclipped his badge from his belt and handed it to Chen, his hands visibly shaking. Chen took it without another word. Get in your vehicle and return to the station. Report to the sergeant on duty. You're done for the day? Possibly for your career. Hayes walked back to his patrol car, got in, and drove away. The crowd of shoppers who'd been watching began to disperse, but their phones were still out, still recording, still uploading. Chen turned back to Richardson. Captain, again, I'm deeply sorry. This should never have happened. Richardson's voice was steady, but the frustration was clear. Lieutenant, this isn't about an apology. This is about a pattern. Hayes has 9 complaints on his record. 9. And he's still on patrol, still making stops like this, still assuming black people are criminals until proven otherwise. I know, and I should have pushed harder to have him removed after the 6th complaint. Should or not, here we are. An officer in my own precinct stopped me in a parking lot and accused me of being suspicious because I was loading groceries while black. If this can happen to me, with my rank and my authority, what's happening to everyone else? The parking lot had returned to normal. Cars came and went. Shoppers moved through their routines. But the incident was already spreading, recorded from multiple angles, shared across social media, tagged and hashtagged and forwarded. Within 4 hours, the videos had exploded online. Multiple angles showed the confrontation. Richardson explaining she was loading groceries. Hayes demanding ID. Richardson identifying herself as his captain. Hayes dismissing her claim as fake. The caption that accompanied most videos was simple and devastating. Officer stops his own police captain because she's black. Kennesaw PD captain, detained by own officer in Walmart parking lot. Black police captain stopped for suspicious activity, buying groceries. Officer doesn't recognize his commanding officer, demands ID anyway. The outrage was immediate and widespread. The Georgia NAACP issued a statement condemning the stop. The National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives demanded an investigation. Community activists called for Hayes' termination. The Fraternal Order of Police, typically defensive of officers, issued a cautious statement acknowledging the incident was troubling and needed review. Officer Marcus Hayes was placed on administrative leave within hours of the incident. The Kennesaw Police Department launched an internal investigation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The body camera footage showed everything. Hayes stopping Richardson without cause. Hayes demanding ID despite her verbal identification. Hayes dismissing her credentials as fake. Hayes proceeding even after she explained who she was. The investigation took 6 days. The findings were unambiguous. Hayes had violated department policy on stops and detentions, failed to exercise reasonable judgment, and demonstrated a pattern of bias consistent with his 9 prior complaints. Hayes submitted a brief written statement through his attorney. I was responding to a dispatch call and exercised my judgment as a patrol officer. I did not recognize Captain Richardson and followed standard procedure for verifying identification. I regret any misunderstanding. The statement was dismissed by the department as insufficient and tone-deaf. Captain Richardson contacted a civil rights attorney within 3 days of the incident. The attorney was David Park, a respected litigator with a track record of winning cases against law enforcement agencies for discriminatory policing. Park reviewed the evidence and reached an immediate conclusion. This was not just a wrongful stop. This was proof of systemic failure. The lawsuit named Officer Marcus Hayes for unlawful detention and racial profiling, Lieutenant James Chen for supervisory failure to remove Hayes after multiple complaints, and the Kennesaw Police Department for failure to train, supervise, and discipline officers with documented patterns of bias. The claims were extensive and specific: unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, racial profiling and discrimination based on race, failure to recognize chain of command and proper authority, intentional infliction of emotional distress and reputational harm, failure to supervise officers with known patterns of discriminatory conduct, failure to implement training that prevents racial profiling. The complaint included Hayes' complete disciplinary record: 9 complaints over 7 years, 6 involving allegations of racial profiling, 2 sustained, resulting in reprimands, 7 closed without meaningful investigation. Every complaint involved the same pattern: Hayes stopping, questioning, or detaining black individuals in situations where white individuals would not have been stopped. A black man in a gated community, stopped and questioned for walking his dog. A black woman jogging at dawn, followed and questioned about stolen shoes. A black teenager in a parked car, searched without consent while waiting for his mother. The pattern was documented, undeniable, and ignored by the department until it targeted someone with authority to fight back. The city's attorneys reviewed the case and reached a conclusion within weeks: indefensible. The body camera footage was damning. The witnesses were credible. The complaint history was documented. The plaintiff was a police captain, someone whose credibility could not be attacked, and the public outrage was intense enough that a trial would be a spectacle the city couldn't afford. The city settled 9 months later. $3.8 million paid to Captain Diane Richardson. The settlement included additional terms. Hayes would be terminated. The department would implement mandatory training on implicit bias and racial profiling, and an independent review board would audit all officer stops for patterns of discrimination. Officer Marcus Hayes was terminated 6 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was direct and final. Officer Marcus Hayes is terminated effective immediately for violating department policies on lawful stops and detentions, demonstrating a pattern of racially biased policing, and failing to recognize proper chain of command authority. Despite 2 sustained complaints and mandatory training interventions, Officer Hayes continued to engage in discriminatory conduct that has damaged community trust and exposed the department to significant liability. His employment is terminated without appeal. Hayes' name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 33 years old. He released no public statement. His attorney declined to comment. The Kennesaw Police Department faced intensive scrutiny. How had Hayes remained on patrol after 9 complaints? Why hadn't supervisors removed him after? The pattern became clear. What policies existed to prevent officers from racially profiling their own command staff? An independent review commissioned by the city found systemic failures at every level. 9 complaints over 7 years. 2 sustained, 7 dismissed without thorough investigation. Multiple witnesses in prior incidents whose statements were not followed up. Training requirements completed but never assessed for behavior change. Supervisors who noted problems in performance reviews but took no corrective action. A disciplinary system that treated each complaint in isolation rather than identifying patterns. The Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council opened its own investigation. Their findings confirmed what the city's review had shown. The department had failed to act on clear warning signs. Reforms were announced within weeks. Automatic suspension for any officer with 3 or more sustained complaints involving discrimination. Mandatory. Pattern analysis after any officer receives 2 complaints of the same nature. Independent civilian oversight with authority to review complaint files and recommend discipline. Quarterly audits of all traffic stops, pedestrian stops, and detentions, analyzed by race, location, and outcome. Immediate review board for any officer who fails to recognize command staff. Should departments face federal oversight after repeated failures to address officer misconduct? Drop your answer. Captain Diane Richardson testified before the Kennesaw City Council 3 months after the incident. Her testimony was measured, powerful, and devastating. I'm Captain Diane Richardson. I've been with the Kennesaw Police Department for 24 years. I command the 3rd Precinct. I have a master's degree in public administration. I've trained hundreds of officers. I've received commendations from the governor, from community organizations, from my own department. And none of that mattered when Officer Hayes saw me loading groceries into my car. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. I was stopped, detained, and questioned, because Officer Hayes looked at me and saw a black woman in a parking lot. Not a captain, not a fellow officer, not someone who'd earned her place through decades of service. Just a black woman who, in his judgment, looked suspicious. Another pause. Officer Hayes had 9 complaints in 7 years. 9. 6 of them involved stopping black people for existing in spaces where he didn't think we belonged. 2 were sustained. 7 were dismissed. And somehow, he remained on patrol, free to keep making these stops, free to keep humiliating people, free to keep destroying trust between police and community. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The city is paying me $3.8 million. That's significant. That's accountability, but it doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't erase the fact that I was racially profiled by one of my own officers. It doesn't change the message that was sent. Even a police captain isn't safe from bias if she's black. She looked directly at the council members. If this can happen to me, with my rank, my authority, my resources, what happens to everyone else? What happens to the black teenager who gets stopped for sitting in his car? The black woman who gets questioned for jogging in her own neighborhood? The black man who gets detained for walking his dog? They don't have badges. They don't have attorneys on speed dial. They don't have the platform to demand accountability. The room was silent. 9 complaints. That's not bad luck. That's not misunderstanding. That's a pattern. And your department ignored it until it became a lawsuit. This wasn't just about one stop in a Walmart parking lot. This was about a department that allowed Officer Marcus Hayes to accumulate 9 complaints over 7 years without meaningful consequences. This was about supervisors who saw the pattern, documented the pattern, and then filed it away, as if notation was the same as action. Hayes's record told a story his department chose not to read. 9 complaints, 6 involving racial profiling. Every single one followed the same script. Hayes stops a black person in a space where he doesn't think they belong. The person explains their presence. Hayes doesn't believe them. Hayes escalates. The complaint is filed. The department reviews it in isolation, never connecting it to the previous 8 incidents. The pattern was obvious. But patterns require someone to look at the full picture, and the Kennesaw Police Department treated every complaint as a standalone incident. Hayes would complete his bias training, sign the form, return to patrol, and within months, another complaint would arrive. By the time Hayes stopped Captain Richardson, he'd been trained 4 times on implicit bias, twice on de-escalation, and once on community policing. He'd attended every session, completed every worksheet, passed every quiz. And none of it changed his behavior because training without accountability is just paperwork. Officer Marcus Hayes' career is over. That's consequence. The city paid $3.8 million. That's accountability. The department implemented reforms. That's progress. But those outcomes don't undo the harm. They don't restore Captain Richardson's dignity. They don't erase the message that was sent to every black officer, every black resident, every black person who watched those videos and thought, if it can happen to a police captain, it can happen to anyone. The real question is, what changes now? Do police departments finally connect the dots after 3 complaints instead of waiting for 9? Do supervisors finally remove officers who demonstrate patterns of bias instead of sending them to another 4-hour training session? Do we finally acknowledge that implicit bias training without consequences is just a bureaucratic shield against liability? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Hayes on patrol for 7 years, despite 9 documented complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught him to see black people as inherently suspicious, then we're just waiting for the next Marcus Hayes, the next Diane Richardson, the next parking lot confrontation that goes viral and costs millions. Comment if you believe this should be federal law. Officers with 3 sustained complaints of discrimination face automatic termination and decertification. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with exposure and change starts with public pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing the officers who see badges on white skin, but suspicion on black skin. We're going to keep demanding that departments treat patterns as patterns, not isolated incidents. We're going to keep fighting for the captains, the shoppers, the everyday people who deserve to load groceries without being treated like criminals. This isn't just about one officer in one parking lot. It's about all of us and the systems we're willing to accept. It's about whether we demand better or just wait for the next video, the next settlement, the next person whose credentials aren't enough to protect them from assumptions. Captain Diane Richardson spent 24 years earning her badge. Officer Marcus Hayes spent 7 years proving he shouldn't have one. The question is, how many more officers are out there right now, accumulating complaints, waiting for their moment to confront someone who can finally fight back?